NJ Spotlight's Roundtable on the Future of New Jersey Solar Policy brought together key policymakers, interested members of the community, and leading solar vendors and their customers in a wide-ranging discussion moderated by Tom Johnson, NJ Spotlight's Energy and Environment Editor. The Future of Solar Policy is the first in an ongoing series of roundtables on clean energy presented by NJ Spotlight. This program is brought to you by SunPower, Sun Edison, and Sun Farm Network. In this program, questions and answers with solar energy vendors on the panel.
Terry, if there's one single thing you could change to make New Jersey's solar policy better, what would you do?
Well, I think the single most important aspect of policy right now has to be the solar alternative compliance payment schedule. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a technical aspect of the policy. We can go into more details as you like, Tom, but that solar alternative compliance payment, or SACP, sets the parameters of or the ceiling on where SRECs can trade, and serves primarily as an incentive to drive long-term in the market. Long-term contracts are one of the key mechanisms that provide a revenue stream for these projects and the return profiles that Ed had mentioned earlier. In the absence of a sufficiently long schedule, there's only about 6 years left of the current schedule. It's very difficult for investment partners, financial institutions, and others to value or to set appropriate price for those long-term contracts. Right now, the Solar Energy Advancement and Fair Competition Act, passed earlier this year under the leadership of Chairman Shivakula, requires a 15-year schedule. As we sit here today, we've only got 6 years established, and getting that extension and getting that schedule set at an appropriate level is absolutely critical to the continued investment in solar.
How effective would it be in bringing down the prices of the SRECs? There's been a lot of criticism that SRECs are too high, and there's been talk about how do we bring them down.
Well, I think it can be very effective, but in a way that's probably counterintuitive to most. Again, as I mentioned, the solar alternative compliance payment is primarily intended to incent long-term contracts. Long-term contracts in the market right now are trading at a fraction of what spot prices are. Long-term contracts trade generally under $400 per SREC, while spot prices are north of $650. So there's over a $250 discount, if you will, between spot prices and long-term contracts. To the degree that the SACP schedule is set appropriately, high enough to continue to incent long-term contracting, we'll see the market shift. Right now, only about a third of trades are on long-term contracts. A sufficiently high ACP will drive more trades to long-term contracts, more trades at that $400 and below level, and that'll reduce costs to ratepayers.
What about you, Fred?
Well, let me just amplify on something Terry just said. To drive down SREC prices is really two critical aspects. One is setting the ACP appropriately, 15-year ACP, as Terry said, to drive RPS obligants to enter into long-term SREC contracts. But the other aspect of it is the supply and demand balance in the marketplace. And as some of the previous speakers, Chairman Shivakula noted, even in today's market, we're seeing an incredible run rate, if you will. 10 megawatts a month of solar, on average, is going in every month. Now, the obligation for 2011 is somewhere around 300 megawatts. We already have 210. We're getting 10 megawatts more each month. So very shortly, and that's not even considering the 1,500 megawatts of wholesale merchant plants that are in the PJM queue. These are very large projects on the order of 20 megawatts and up. Now, there will be, we know, a high attrition rate. Not all those projects will get built, but if only a fraction of those projects get built, coupled with those projects that are on the retail side, the customer side, very quickly we'll see the market achieve balance, and that will help drive SREC prices down as well.
Several people have mentioned Assemblyman Shivakula's Solar Advancement Act, which sets very aggressive targets. This year, the state's clean energy budget has been cut by $400 million, and there's little chance that funding is going to be restored to previous year's levels. Can the solar industry maintain the same pace, 10 megawatts, 11 megawatts a month, without that infusion of state funding?
Tom, I'll take a crack at that. Yes, absolutely, and so I'm going to first disagree with you on, I don't think the goals are too ambitious. If anything, I think they're under ambitious. Building about 5 gigawatts worth of solar by 2026 is about 5% of our total electricity supply. That's not all that exciting to me, given where we need to go. And we have countries like Spain and Germany that have built a heck of a lot more, so it's not a question of can we build this. We can absolutely build this. But to your question, since the funding mechanism has changed, and this was, I think, one of the ideas that have been floating around for nearly a decade when the solar program was started back in the beginning of the 2000s, was we wanted to try to do something fundamentally different and move to a market-based mechanism for the incentive piece of solar. Now, I'm going to back up a second and just say incentive, in my mind, is not a dirty word. It's required always, as a public-private partnership is always required to build infrastructure, no matter what you're building and whatever power plant you're putting in. And so we were going to take a look with solar and try to do something very different. And there's been some really interesting innovation in policy here, which is why we appear so high on somebody's scorecard, to innovate a policy structure that I think for the first time puts that incentive and subjects it to a market, a competitive market, to drive down the price of that incentive to the ratepayers. Because we made this transition from the rebate paradigm to this SREC market paradigm, I don't think we have that risk now. A big public pot of money has a lot of risks associated with it, and it's a limited way to build scale. And we need scale in renewables very badly. We're very behind. So I think this gives us the mechanism to grow the market significantly at the lowest cost to the ratepayers, which is, I think these two fundamental goals. Let's get to the greenhouse gas reductions we need, transition to clean energy as quickly and efficiently as we can, and do it at the lowest cost to the ratepayers. I think the program that has been designed meets those goals really well, and I don't think it's really understood as well as it should be on those really important criteria.
There's some people who are very concerned, however, that the big mega solar projects that are coming online are going to gobble up all the SRECs and squeeze out the small players. And it's going to create problems for the diversity for the smaller firms that have relied on the rebates. I think this year there's only $3 million in the solar program. Are we squeezing out the small guys in this industry? Matt, you want to take a step? Or whoever.
Well, I guess I'll just offer first the observation that it's interesting. On one hand, we might argue that we can't build enough solar, and then on the other hand, we might argue that we're building too much. So, I think that the most important thing to remember, and what I think that many folks in the industry have advocated for, is to maintain balance. I think it's critically important to have a diverse ecosystem, if you will, of businesses involved in solar. It certainly helps from an economic development standpoint and a job standpoint to have folks that are doing residential systems, small commercial systems, large commercial, and even utility scale systems. And I think that overall the policy has done a nice job of balancing those objectives. We have programs in place today that support smaller projects. There are still, for this year and for next year, anticipated to be rebates for residential systems, along with the SREC Finance Program and the PSE&G Solar Loan Program, which all support, in varying ways, those different segments. And then, of course, for the very largest systems, some may still qualify for SRECs without any other rebates, and others may not qualify for SRECs at all, and will have to survive solely on the basis of the value of the power that they deliver to the grid. So I think that the market addresses diversity today, and I think we have to work hard to preserve that, but I think we've taken some good steps in that direction.
Tom, if I may, I think SRECs do not differentiate whether you are a small solar installer or a large solar installer. As long as you are able to deliver 1 megawatt hour of energy, you are eligible for SRECs. I think the key here is that how do you achieve that balance? And if you are depending on a firm fixed price and a long-term contract, I think that's where the issue comes into picture. And the risks are there. If you're a smaller solar installer, you have the amount of money you have to put out, and whether you are able to get the loans from the banks, and that's a challenge. I don't think it is the issue of whether the big guys are going to come and gobble up the whole thing. That is not there. We are working on that, making sure that up to 10 megawatts, we want to make sure it goes through, about 10 megawatts go through the BPU, and trying to look at, based on the location, interconnection requirements, they will be adjusting according to that. So I think SRECs per se do not differentiate, but I think it's just a question of how do you get the, I think if you're a small guy, trying to get the financing, it's a little more difficult because of whatever the banking regulations are.
Is there anything the state can do to help the small guys line up the financing they need?
Well, they can certainly work with economic EDA, the Economic Development Authority. There are programs they can help you through some of the issues associated with that. And I think if you have the right message and saying, look, the SREC programs work for everybody, I think that is there. That is, and also with the alternate compliance payments, once you define it beyond 2016, I think that will send a strong signal to the marketplace that look, we have this is the ceiling on those prices, and we will get this much money, and that will drive more long-term contracting.
Assemblyman, you mentioned the EDA. There's, in the current debate over the ongoing energy master plan, there's been talk of moving the Clean Energy Office out of BPU, perhaps giving it to EDA, turning it over to the utilities or some other entity. What are our panelists' thought on where the Clean Energy Office ought to be, and should stay at BPU?
Well, I'll take that one. I mean, I think our biggest issue is continuity, ensuring continuity. The Solar Energy Advancement Act codifies policies and programs that the board has instituted for a number of years. And it's critical that we maintain market momentum as we transition to this SREC program. I think we're very concerned that taking that office out of the board would be highly disruptive. We can't, the industry just simply can't sustain that kind of hiatus. So you do have the institutional knowledge, expertise, and that's really where this program ought to reside. Not to mention it's highly integrated with energy markets, and again, the board has that expertise to see how solar contributes to our overall energy mix.
What's your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I would say, from an environmental standpoint and a clean energy standpoint, we're agnostic as to who's running the program, but I would agree we want to make sure that there are no disruptions, that we're still getting as much solar as possible, that we're getting as much energy efficiency as possible, as much wind as possible, in a manner that's as efficient as possible and as cost effective as possible to ratepayers. We think the BPU has done a great job running the clean energy program. We have one of the most successful solar programs in the nation because of the way they've run it. We've successfully reduced energy demand, despite projections that demand would just continue to rise, out of control for years and years to come. We think the BPU's done a good job. We'd be happy to see it stay in the BPU, but if there's a proposal to do it out of another agency, potentially that could work. One concern I'd say that we have is that if EDA is running the program, for example, the Economic Development Authority, we want to make sure that they're catering certainly to commercial and industrial customers like they do now, but also that the residential market is still being served, whether it's solar or energy efficiency.
Tom, I think EDA has done a fantastic job in terms of running the economic development in New Jersey, and they are good in terms of bond financing, various banking issues. Clean energy requires special knowledge and understanding of the marketplace, and we need to continue that. I think that's the point. I think I would like to stress upon. It's not something somebody just can pick up and run with it. It's going to take time. Not that EDA cannot do it. It may require some learning curve. Why do you want to disrupt something like that if it's already working? Why you want to fix something that's working? And if there are some adjustments that need to be made, they can be made. And I think Clean Energy Office deserves a place, I think, at the BPU.
All right, I'll take here's a question from the audience, Assemblyman. It's something near and dear to your heart. What are the prospects for A915?
Okay, I don't know how many of you know by the number. Let me give you a little background on that. I think basically we have a net metering, which has been a very successful program, meaning you have a contiguous land, you can put a meter which goes in both directions. If you are sending power to the grid, it goes in one direction. If you are getting power from the grid, it goes in the other direction. So that's what I think the customers were talking about. And we wanted to expand that idea beyond that, and we wanted to make sure that a concept called community net metering. If you're living in a condominium complex and you cannot put solar panels on your roof, and if we can make use of the common area and generate electricity, and then thereby you get included in the program, that was the idea behind the community net metering. That's what the Assembly Bill 915, and it went through the Senate, and we made a lot of changes to that. And right now, it went through the Assembly Committee, Telecom and Utilities Committees 3 times, and it's going to come back again, hopefully. And I think there are some issues that need to be addressed. One major issue the administration is concerned is that solar is already costing a lot of money, and we are not everybody is going to be entitled to have solar because it costs so much, and we are giving additional incentives. SRECs are enough. We don't want to give something on top of that. And then environmentalists are concerned because they think that there is a way to avoid connecting to the grid. The way the structure, the legislation is structured, is called aggregated net metering, because if you are living in a condominium complex, you still have to, when the solar energy is not available or wind energy is not available, you have to get the power, and the power is coming from the utilities. The utilities are going to be billing you and collecting the money from that, and then this generation is separate, and that will be sold into the PJM grid, and then you can get reimbursed at the wholesale rate. Sometimes the wholesale rates are higher than the basic generation or BGS rates, and so that have to be adjusted. There is a reconciliation process at the end of the year, and that has to go through. And so environmentalists, some of them think that this is not the way. They want to avoid PJM altogether. I don't know how they can do that. I'm waiting to hear from them on that. But that's one area, and then there is one provision in the legislation that if you have all electric homes built in the last 10 years or so, then they get additional incentives, which is there are about 200,000 all electric homes built 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and there is an enormous cost. If you're trying to give them 120%, that means at what point do the ratepayers cease to subsidize? How much subsidy can you provide? I think that's the question. If we can resolve all those issues, I think the community net metering concept is a good concept. Aggregated net metering will work, and I worked on it for 3 years, and now it's stuck somewhere. But I think I'd like to see that go forward.
Thank you. How about for Terry, for each new megawatt of solar which is being backed out of utility generation, what are we losing? Are we losing coal, natural gas, nuke, or what?
Can you repeat that question, Tom? For each
For
megawatt?
each new megawatt of solar, which fuel are we backing out of the traditional generation?
Well, I think it's really driven by pricing. Generally speaking, solar is most productive, as you can imagine, at the middle of the day on the hottest days of the month or year. And so generally what solar is replacing is what it's competing with, which are the most expensive gas peakers the older and more expensive plants that are only brought online to serve those peak load days. And so fundamentally, I think that's what solar replaces first as a peak resource. Over time, with more solar, it can begin to replace other resources as well.
Which sort of leads to another question from the audience. The person wrote, grid supply projects of large size will strive to sell their SRECs at the highest prices to maximize their profits. These projects don't serve the needs of one particular energy consumer and are more akin to new central generation. Shouldn't these large projects have to compete among themselves to achieve the lowest long-term impact on ratepayers? How about that, Fred?
Well, I'll just harken back to what Terry said earlier. I mean, we're still in a situation where it hasn't been demonstrated yet that we are oversupplied, and you know, these projects have considerable project development risk in and of themselves. So they are providing all the same benefits. They're typically distributed resources, so they're avoiding or deferring distribution system upgrades. They're helping bring down the wholesale price, which is a benefit to all consumers, because as Terry said, you're backing out expensive, antiquated, dirty, oil-fired peak generating systems. So that's a societal benefit. And they're providing jobs. So I wouldn't want to see these projects disadvantaged in any way. And I mean, I wouldn't want to see the market segmented in such a way that you're creating artificial constraints to various projects. Now that said, there is legislation that Assemblyman Shivakula has introduced that basically sets limits on project size that are eligible to participate in the SREC market. That's A229, and gives the board some authority to look at projects on a case-by-case basis, whether the economics and societal benefits warrant project participating in the SREC market. So I would rather see that type of approach than a blanket rule that somehow ghettoizes wholesale projects.
I can't speak for all industry. I could just speak for the company I work for. When we went into solar, we didn't do it to try to make a lot of money on the SRECs. The SRECs gave us the opportunity to move forward to reduce our CO2 footprint. We locked into a long-term contract through SunPower. I was not looking at the SRECs, at least with our business, to generate these huge profits. We were looking for a reasonable return. You know, I'm not going to fool you. The incentive was very important to give us that return on investment. But these systems, they're proven. Photovoltaic technology has been out there a long time, and they're proven to last 25, 30, 40 years. So if you get a return on investment 5, 6 years, the system's going to continue generating. And from what I understand, I think the panels themselves maybe degrade about 0.5% a year. So even in 20 years, your system should still output, put out another 90% of what originated. So I don't know if that eases some people's minds here. I'm not saying maybe there are some industries out there looking to make a profit on the SRECs, but that was not our reason for going solar. It was more truly to be some cost reduction, absolutely, but to meet our environmental objectives, which is to reduce the CO2 footprint. So.
I think, Tom, one of the most important things is that the PJM, our grid, requires, trying to see how you can produce it, where the power is being used, the energy being used. And so I think solar really plays a key role in that. It's another thing is that it really excites people when you say, oh, my neighbor has a solar panel, how do I get? So you're engaging the public into this thing and say, talk about energy. Otherwise, people are looking at, I flip my switch, I have electricity, I have a refrigerator. We take all these things for granted, understanding where the energy is coming from, how I can be part in terms of making a difference. I think solar plays a key role, and it is as visible as anything else.
Thank you.
Part of answering this question about grid supply, there's a lot behind grid supply. There's a question of appropriate size of projects in a place like New Jersey for a whole bunch of reasons. We had talked a little bit about sort of market control. And again, 5 gigawatts, it's not very big really, especially it seems big today, but it really isn't. It's a small fraction of our overall use, and the industry can more than meet it. But there is a question about what is the right and appropriate sort of average project size for solar systems in New Jersey, given a whole bunch of things, given the state of our distribution system, given land use policy in the state of New Jersey, given what a community, a suburban enclave might think appropriate in their setting. So there's a whole number of balances, I think, and I think that's ultimately the key here is to come to some kind of a balance on what makes sense for New Jersey. We're not Arizona. We're not going to see 300 acres worth of solar panels here. That probably wouldn't make sense here. And there may be some tweaks we need to sort of get to optimization there. I'll also suggest that in building a solar plant for the people of the state of New Jersey that's going to be highly distributed, it's not in anybody's interest to have us pay for that in 3 years. And this is this whole point about long-term contracts and why even for grid supply projects as well, they should be able to have access to long-term contracting mechanisms, because ultimately it's just, I like to use the example of, would you rather, pay for your house with a 30-year mortgage or a 5-year mortgage? It's going to be better for the ratepayers on a year-to-year ratepayer impact basis to have that cost spread out over time. So I think there's if I could wave my magic wand and say what are the few things we could do in the solar policy today to make things really, really optimized, it would be get the SACP done and done correctly, and really optimize and create long-term contracting environments.
That leads into another question, and I'm going to put Mike Winker from the Office of Clean Energy, ask him to answer this. When will the SACP be through 2026 be set?
Soon.
How soon?
Soon. We're just going through the final evaluations of the model, so we'll get a revised 15-year solar ACP back through the advisory group. There's by law, there's an advisory group that's set up by the president of the board. That advisory group will look at that, will comment on that, and then based on that, we'll go with a rule proposal on the 15-year solar ACP. But we need to do our due diligence on the side of the 15-year solar ACP. By the law that was just signed into law says we can't lower the solar ACP once the board sets it in rules. That sets a pretty high bar for an evaluation for an entity to make a prediction out 15 years. So, there's some amount of time that has to go into that evaluation. We're going to do it right, and we're going to get it through the solar ACP committee. We'll go through that process and then have it in a rule proposal for comments out to the public.
Will that happen by the end of the year, do you think?
The best I can say is soon.
Okay, thank you. All right, we've got tons of questions here. I'll ask our panelists our manufacturers, what type of solar panels are currently being installed? Specifically, are they made with cadmium? And if so, is that of any concern?
I can say that, well, let me speak broadly first. There are a variety of technologies in the industry that different companies employ. And I'll say as SunPower, we don't have an opinion on those one way or another. But cadmium telluride panels are used in thin film technologies. There are other types of thin film technologies that are out there. Our company happens to use polycrystalline technology, a silicon technology. But there's always innovation going on in the industry. All solar companies, I would say, are keenly aware of the environmental impact of their manufacturing processes. I think it would be hard to find one that you couldn't point to that wouldn't have some kind of a sustainability or impact assessment of their manufacturing operations. And so I think the industry works hard to, particularly given the field that we're in, works very hard to ensure that the technology not only has all of the benefits we've already discussed, but also does so in a way that doesn't impact the environment in a negative way.
Pam, getting back to you on the solar on farms. Recently, President Solomon said he's not a big fan of putting big solar mega projects on farms. Is there a limit that should be put on the size of solar facilities on agricultural land?
That's a good question because it gets to the heart of, we don't want electrons versus food debate going on in New Jersey. And so we have to be very careful. And I think that Senator Smith had addressed this with some legislation last year in attempts to define very carefully what could be considered suitable for farmland preservation and preserved farms and farmland assessed property as well, and put some limits there. Specifically for that. So I'm a proponent of, it's not I always come back to, it's not a question of not enough space. We have more than enough space in the state to meet our solar needs. I think our assessment is if we wanted to do 20% of all of our electricity needs with solar, 20%, it would be under 1% of our land area, and that's with current technology. So we don't have to cover every farm acre to meet our needs. And I think we have to strike a careful balance. You want to find, again, it's balance. You don't want to disenfranchise the agricultural community from enjoying a benefit to solar on the one hand. On the other hand, you don't want to set up a food versus electron debate. So it's just a question of balance. So I think for farmable farmland, there should be some reasonable balance there, and that probably meets some limits about what should be done.
Talking about the price of solar, here's a question from the audience. If the price of solar comes down to parity with grid prices, do we stop the SREC program? And if so, how do we do it?
Well, I think the market will dictate that. If solar, I should say when solar, because it really is a question of when, it very much is a declining cost industry, unlike other generation technologies. But when grid parity is achieved, that essentially means that the industry can do without incentives, and that's really the ultimate goal here. We're all striving for a day when the industry is self-sustaining, and so I'd advocate for no incentives at that point, and the project should be able to stand on its own economic feet.
Along those lines, during the last hearing before the BPU on the Energy Master Plan, there was a customer like Ed and Ronnie here who talked about their efforts to install solar at a facility, and he talked about getting a return on investment in 7 years, but he's still going to be collecting SRECs for the remaining part of the 15 years. And he said that's great for him, but he says that didn't seem to make much sense from a societal perspective. Should people, once they get a return on their investment, stop collecting SRECs? And is that a way to bring the price of solar down?
Well, I think that's really the value and the power of the SREC market. Someone who has already paid off their investment has a lower threshold for where they might want to trade those SRECs. And so by definition, that person can sell those SRECs at lower prices, and the competitive nature of the market will respond, and SREC prices will come down over time for those participants that are in that position. I think the really important thing to remember is that, again, we talked about the difference between the spot market, if you will, which is where you might get today high prices, but tomorrow who knows what you might get, versus long-term contracts, which are already trading at lower and stable prices. In that example where someone might get a high return, perhaps they get $600 in the first year, but as supply and demand comes into balance in the next 12 to 18 months, perhaps they only get a few $100s in the next year, and in the 8 years that follow, or the 9 years that follow. And if you look then on an average basis, what's the ratepayer impact of 10 years of SRECs that were, say, as much as $600 in the first year, but just as an example, $200 in the remaining 9 years, that's a much lower price than that first year's indication. And so anyway, I think the key point is that it is market. It will seek the lowest point where participants are willing and able to trade their SRECs, and over time it will respond accordingly.
How soon?
12 to 18 months.
We hope you enjoyed this NJ Spotlight program on energy policy. If you have comments or suggestions about these programs, please email info@njspotlight.com. NJ Spotlight, where issues matter. For more information, visit www.njspotlight.com.